You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Cyberspace, the new frontier. These are the voyages of the podcast First Contact. Its mission? To explore every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. To seek out new viewers and have new conversations. To boldly view what many have viewed before. Welcome to First Contact, the Star Trek The Next Generation intro cast, where we explore every single episode of Star Trek The Next Generation through the eyes of a new viewer. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This week we have watched Heart of Glory, which first aired the week of March 21st, 1988. It was written by Maurice Hurley, Herbert Wright and DC Fontana, and directed by Rob Bowman. James, tell me all about this one.
The Enterprise enters the neutral zone to investigate the distress call of a Tellurian freighter. On board they find 3 Klingons who claim they were attacked by the Ferengi. Worf bonds with the warriors and finds his loyalties torn. The Klingons are revealed to be renegades, wanted by the Klingon Empire, and escape the Enterprise's crack security team. They are killed, but that's okay because they died a good death.
Well, it's a Klingon episode, it's a Worf backstory episode. What were your first thoughts, Alex, having never seen it before?
Well, I thought it was one of the better ones we've had. I still think that there's some episodes that have been better than this one, but I think that maybe that's just me not being such a big fan of the Klingons.
The Klingons? One of the touchstones of Star Trek. What possible problem can you have with them?
Yeah, that doesn't bode well, does it? To be honest with you, I think it's something about the costumes. It's a long-standing thing. It's not just watching the series for this. There's just something about that bulky samurai-esque costume. It's always just struck me as a bit, I don't know, silly and slightly cheap looking, and the same goes for the mad hair really as well. And the fact, well, I'll be perfectly honest, the fact that they look a little bit Arabic, that just always makes me a little bit uncomfortable.
So you think that they're racist?
I hesitate to jump straight to that, but
Well, as you know, I only like the racist aliens.
So I'm guessing you loved this episode.
Well, it's the best one up to now.
There we go then.
For any new listeners, I recommend you go back and listen to Code of Honor, one of James's other favourite episodes. I think we can accept that many of the alien cultures do derive quite a lot from Earth's culture and Earth's heritage. It might be a little uncomfortable, but at least we don't have white guys in black makeup, eh? Oh. Moving on from any particular problems we might have with one set of aliens, let's talk about the big early set piece. There's a vessel in distress. Obviously, it smells like a trap, says Captain Picard. So you don't send a probe or anything over. You send away half the bridge crew, but not Tasha Yar. She has to stay on the ship. So you send them over, and there's a great innovation attached to Geordi's visor.
So wait, why does Geordi wear this visor? He's not blind, is he?
of course he is. It was established very early on.
Geordi's blind.
He is.
I don't know how you could have missed that. I mean, it was really made one of his defining traits. It's been made really clear up till now.
Have you not been paying attention since the first episode? I mean, we've been podcasting about each one of these episodes. You would have thought you'd have picked it up by now.
Well, I don't know what could have... They haven't mentioned it.
Well, I can honestly say, hand on heart, that Geordie's blindness has never been in question on this podcast before now. It's not the sort of thing that we joke about. If you do, you run the risk of it becoming an ongoing gag, week in, week out. Imagine we did that, and then imagine that we reached a point where people started quoting the joke back at us. And imagine that made us realise what a cheap and pretty terrible gag that is. Imagine how then we'd have to go to some incredible kind of length to try and kill it off, maybe by denying that we've ever made this kind of joke in a future edition of the podcast. What a ridiculous state of affairs that'd be!
So, what they do is they attach a camera to Geordie's visor so that it can transmit what he sees back to the Enterprise. Now, I might be missing something, but today, I'm pretty sure we have that technology where you can have a camera, say, broadcasting a signal to another location not too far away so you can get real-time pictures. Is it just me? Do they not have this in the future?
Well, Geordie can actually see with perfect 20/20 vision. It's just that he's on very strong hallucinogenic drugs.
If it's that important for the bridge to be able to see the away mission, then surely they could set something up that would do that anyway. With all the fancy gadgets and sensors, I don't imagine that should be beyond them.
If they can transmit sound, surely they can transmit vision.
I mean, I don't mind it so much. It is quite a nice way to bring the bridge more into the action, so it doesn't mean they're just standing there. But it does feel like this shouldn't be an amazing prototype. Just because Geordie has a magical visor doesn't mean there aren't other ways to transmit pictures.
And of course, now that we've brought the bridge crew into the away team, it's going to be used in every episode from this point, and it's not going to be dropped and never used again.
Exactly. I mean, can you imagine Star Trek without the visual acuity transmitter now? I know I certainly can't.
I'd also like to make the point that when they are watching that screen, everyone is going on about how hard it is to decipher what they're looking at, and Picard says, "No, back on your left. Who's that?" "It's Riker, Captain." "It's clearly Riker." "Ironically, you would have to be blind not to see it's Riker."
Is Picard blind? And they're standing around on a disintegrating ship, just pissing about with Geordie's visor. It's ridiculous.
And also, did you notice the music when Geordie Vision comes on? It's like, you're on a magical ride! It's not exactly subtle.
Also, Picard says Data appears to have some sort of aura around him. Of course he does, Captain. He's an android. What? I don't get... I mean... Huh?
Also, has Geordie been seeing a huge number of androids? I mean, as far as I can tell, there's Data and there's Lore, and this universe seems pretty void of them otherwise. So why should it be a well-established fact that an android has any particular feature, given that they aren't that common?
Yeah, it's a bizarre collection of elements, that scene. Various things that are just thrown away very, very quickly.
Also, Picard says, when he sees what Geordie sees, "I'm beginning to understand him." Good, let's define him by his disability then. That's good.
Does that mean if we put Picard in a short dress or a catsuit that he'd start to understand what it's like to be Councillor Troy?
I can't wait for that episode.
Is Councillor Troy even in this episode?
No.
Again?
And I don't think Wesley was either, unless I'm forgetting.
Well, that's good. They weren't missed.
Just another in a long line of episodes where characters are entirely absent.
Which brings us to Tasha Yar, who is both there and not there at the same time.
Well, it's a Worf episode, so right at the start she's instantly told that she's not to do anything by Picard.
It's a bit odd, isn't it? Because she's told not to go on the away mission. Later on, she asks, should she lead the security team? Is she very sure of her own job?
Rarely has there been an instance so far of a character being given so little to play with. Other than perhaps Worf in what is essentially his own episode, where he stands there while people tell him what he feels.
The other thing with Tasha Yar is, as we've seen on many occasions, where, teenagers are able to steal shuttles, and generally anybody is able to wander about wherever she wants. She's not very good at her job. In a potentially dangerous situation with Klingon terrorists on board, she doesn't seem to be able to cordon off the area, maybe seal the doors in a certain corridor to make sure tiny ballerinas don't come through at any point.
That was the worst hostage-taking I have ever seen. Everyone just stares each other out for what felt like hours, and then he picks up the child. She says it's a hostage situation. He hands over the child. Tension!
I'm thinking Tasha, with the way she's performing at the moment, she's going to end up getting herself killed. That's what's going to happen.
The other instance of Tasha, of course, is she is sent to the transporter room because, she's the best at shooting phasers and stuff, so she has to go and make sure that the Klingons aren't hostile when she transports them aboard. Again, tension. It looks like they've not transported and the ship's exploded. Who would have then thought that they actually get them in the end? I was on the edge of my seat.
The problem is they end up doing that set piece about 50 times in Star Trek. It happens in Voyager a fair bit, I seem to remember.
It's the same thing as letting the countdown clock get to 1 before you cut the wire. It's wait till just before the ship explodes before the transporter will work. It's a pretty well-trodden path in narrative, but it does feel hackneyed. There's no getting away from it. We might complain if they weren't trying to build up tension as well, but that's just because we're going to complain about everything because it's far more entertaining.
Well, absolutely. No one listens to this podcast to hear us say, I thought it was really great. I loved the racism.
They want to find out more about the Tellurian freighter, and so they send a message to Starfleet. So it's 48 hours for that message to go. Now, why don't they just ask Data? Because he knows everything else in every other situation.
Data's fairly underutilised in this episode, really. I mean, he's there, but I pointed out when we were watching this that it's Data's main role seems to be to sit at the controls, to look over his shoulder with a look of confusion before turning back and using the controls again.
He does that well, and he does do it a lot. It's really noticeable.
Almost as if you could just film them all in one go, like interviews do with noddy shots, and then feed them back in throughout the series.
Yeah, we should maybe do a supercut of that. Except I'm never going to do that.
He also uses his super strength to open up a door.
I feel they really utilised him well there. Incidentally, it didn't look like a very heavy door, did it?
Why didn't they send Worf? I mean, in terms of the story, wouldn't it have been better to send Worf over?
Well, actually, that's quite a good point. The first quarter of the episode, before they discover the Klingons, Worf's barely in it. And considering the rest of the episode is really supposed to be Worf's episode, it would surely make more sense to have him involved from the start.
Yes, especially when they don't send Tasha Yar on the away team. Would her deputy not be the natural candidate?
That would have made sense. I don't really see why they didn't involve him. Because all you end up with is two different sections that don't quite join up enough. I mean, maybe the writer would say it's because you don't want the reaction from Worf to the news that they're Klingons straight away, but to be honest, I don't see why you couldn't have just had that on the ship instead. It would have worked perfectly well.
I mean, he's like the second security officer, so if they don't want to send Tasha, surely they want to send Worf if they think that it's a Romulan trap. It doesn't make sense.
No, what you do is you send your first officer and a unique, one-of-a-kind, highly intelligent android. And Geordi.
who is blind.
Oh, has that come up?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of that set piece, before we move on, the ship, the freighter, I thought that looked quite good. It's quite nice production, a good kind of battle-wrecked ship, some nice lighting as well.
Yeah, it was perfectly nice enough. No obvious recycling. Well, at least I don't think it was recycled, was it?
I don't think it was recycled. If it was done well.
Although, was the Bird of Prey recycled from one of the films?
The footage of the Katinga-class Klingon cruiser is lifted straight from Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Except we don't see it for like half an hour. A lingering shot of the Klingon birds of prey.
You know, whenever anything comes in the view screen and then they go, magnify, why would they not just have it magnified first? Let's say I want to see the thing that's on the screen so that I can actually see it, so it's not just a few pixels in the distance. Just a suggestion for the view screen operator. I'm not quite sure who that is. It's probably Tasha Yar. She's got lots of buttons on that big console.
So, something that we just mentioned in passing there. When Worf first sees the Klingons, he seems to be fighting his urge to fight more than he ever has done before. And that's sort of set up, I suppose, but I don't really see why just meeting other Klingons for what is apparently the first time would really set that off so much.
This is very interesting. I mean, Worf has had not very much to do in this show up to this point, and now we're actually getting an episode dealing with his character and his backstory. It never was even hinted at before now that Worf had been raised by anything other than Klingons, and now we find out that he has actually been raised on a colony by human parents.
Yeah, it's sort of throwing everything at the wall at once because we haven't developed the character until now, isn't it?
In some ways, it is trying to Spockify Worf, someone who is walking the line, who is neither one thing nor the other, and in some ways that means Starfleet can be his only home. It's good what has been essentially a Klingon extra in makeup actually has something interesting to do. It seems to me that it opens many doorways. There's plenty to explore in Worf from this point on.
And absolutely nothing to explore with Tasha Yar.
I guess that something I find odd about it is that we've had references before now to Worf trying to keep these sort of feelings at bay, and yet with the hostage scene, it's suggested that just because there's some other Klingons there, and he's not really familiar with them, that suddenly he's struggling with that, and it's suggested that his decisions are being affected by it. You know, like a randy teenager with the horn that's not really thinking through what they're doing.
Is Worf gay?
Stop spoiling season 2!
He meets these guys, he finds them attractive, he wants to do stuff with them that he's never done before.
They want to run away together. And they've got beards.
Exactly. I mean, you know, they're dressed up in these fancy outfits. Whose head wouldn't be turned by that?
A Gorn? Yeah, purely because they can't move their heads. They have to move their whole body to look to the side. Incidentally, if Worf hasn't ever spent any time with other Klingons, then why is he so certain of what standard Klingon behaviour is? You know, like taking hostages. That's not the Klingon way. Well, how the hell do you know?
He has the big book of Klingon.
It's got pictures.
Pops up.
Well, I imagine he visits the holodeck a lot and brings up some Klingons there and has some fun.
Yeah, he does Klingon private detective novels. That's what he's really into.
I am surprised he hasn't met other Klingons because he seems so sure that he would be too much for other members of the crew. You know, like he couldn't sleep with a human female.
I suppose in some ways it is, you know, it's an explanation for his repression. He is keeping in his Klingon feelings and his Klingon desires, which is to have battles all the time and die a warrior's death. So that's nice. I mean, in some ways, the ideas of this episode are foreshadowing what would come in Star Trek VI with the Klingon peace. It's very much setting up that universe where there is peace between the Klingon Empire and the Federation. And obviously, Star Trek VI made after this, but set before, it does go some way to explaining why this is. So there is some universe building going on here.
And I find it interesting because I'd seen The Undiscovered Country before I saw any of these episodes. So it's interesting for me to see that it wasn't a totally easy piece that was set in stone, but there's actually some resistance to it being played out in this series. From just having seen the films, I didn't realise that was the case. But actually, it makes things a lot more interesting by being less clear-cut.
Worf, he goes to escort the Klingon officers to their quarters and then goes in and, has some drinks and they have some snacks and stuff like that. Is he just allowed to leave his station whenever? Do they have set shifts? Or if, members of your own race come on board, you have special dispensation to go and have a party?
It's never really explained what happens there. I mean, you just see a different face taking over the controls each time. I mean, you have to wonder, where's the training coming from? Some severely unqualified people there. Incidentally, if you want to go back and rewatch this episode, the character that takes over from Geordi, keep an eye out for him because he pulls some of the most extraordinarily camp expressions I have ever seen while he's on that station. Go back and have a look for that.
Is there a second person for every single station? Are there people just lingering on the bridge for no apparent reason, just in case somebody important stands up and goes somewhere else? Because there always seems to be someone to take over when somebody else stands up, and they instantly go. No one ever has to tap them on the shoulder and say, you have to sit there now. And they're like, but who's going to do this inventory that I'm doing right now? I don't know what all the stations on the bridge do. Presumably, they're on the bridge. They must be quite important.
I think the inventory is very important. We need to know how many irradiated haggis the Enterprise has.
How did I know you were going to make a Red Dwarf reference there?
Because I'm sad and predictable.
That should be the new tagline for the podcast.
The Klingon escape plan, they've obviously not been searched in any way. They've not had anything taken off them, even though they are being held in custody. We just put them in a room that doesn't have a door, a big iron door. We just put a force field up. Force fields, I think, as we've established in every single movie franchise ever, are rubbish for keeping in prisoners. Do you know what would be good? Some big strong bars.
Low tech is the way to go. One thing, when they escape, and one of the Klingons that are so interchangeable I can't even remember their names, when he gets shot, why doesn't he get that thing of having his eyes held open while another Klingon screams at some deity in the sky?
I think the other Klingon didn't die in battle, so that's why they had to do this. He died of injuries in battle, whereas the other Klingon died, from being just shot in battle, so he didn't need his soul being sent away.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that we'll see Klingon deaths in the future, and that death ritual's always going to happen, isn't it?
Well, usually the point is Klingons want to die in battle, so presumably dying in battle just sorts everything up for them.
Was that sort of in battle, though?
Well, he died of injuries received in battle, but he died after the battle was over.
By, killing his own people. When did phasers automatically get set to kill? I thought the point was always just to, stun people in general, and then they no longer pose a threat. Is it, if it's red alert or yellow alert, you put all your phasers up to kill? Because it seems a little harsh. I know they're shooting at you, but are you not meant to be the bigger person? They're desperate and hostages. You have the resources of an entire ship at your disposal.
Maybe it's just because they're Klingons. Racists.
Yeah, the security teams, they always stop and search the Klingons, don't they? They always turn their phasers up to kill for the Klingons.
I understand that you want to take over the battle bridge. There were these clues, and we chose to ignore them.
How long have you been waiting to do your South African accent on this podcast?
I have a slight problem. One, with the Klingons being able to take down an entire security team. Fine, they're Klingons, they're trained warriors, but this is a heavily armed ship. And also, why do they need to escort them? Can't they transport them? We have established you can be on a planet that does not have a transporter pad and you can transport someone up. So presumably, you can transport someone, if you need to the transporter room, or directly onto the Klingon ship, no matter where they are. It's very inconsistent.
Yeah, it should be perfectly simple. So much so that at first I just wondered if Picard was using delaying tactics because of the fact that they'd be executed. But no, it wasn't that at all. And was it just me, or did it seem that the episode couldn't really get a firm grip on its own morals? Yeah, because they had that debate over whether they could really turn them over to the Klingons because they'd be executed, but they're terrorists, but it's their natural instinct, etc., etc., etc. And they managed to conveniently avoid having to reach any kind of decision by having them die. Now, admittedly, as a good example, Doctor Who does that often enough. I mean, it did it in Day of the Doctor recently. But, you know, at heart, that's a children's show. And you kind of expect that to do that sort of thing. This, however, I feel is aiming at a more mature audience, and I kind of feel it needs to come down on one side of the fence or the other.
It's difficult morally anyway, where killing is involved. We can't hand them over to be executed. Oh, we can shoot them though, that's fine. That's a good way to die. And I'm sort of thinking, is it, you know, is this a glorious battle when you're trying to escape from prison, essentially, on a ship? I'm not sure going down that way is really in a blaze of glory.
He fell through some glass, what more do you want?
Well, and Worf makes the point that cowards take hostages, Klingons do not. Except the second Klingon, Chorus, he takes the entire ship hostage by, pointing his phaser at the engines.
Yeah. Was anyone else a little bit disappointed in the crew of the Enterprise? I know there are probably engineers down in engineering all sitting at that pool table thing. Surely a big, powerful ship has security protocols. People should not be able just to walk into engineering, and if somebody does, there should be people there with a gun to shoot at them.
Yeah, everyone just stands aside and lets them run past.
I mean, I know the guy's got a phaser, but there's, hundreds of people here. Just jump on top of him, rugby tackle him, do something. Yeah, he's a Klingon, but, he's one Klingon.
Why is the brig so close to engineering?
And if it is, so dangerous, the captain can never go on an away mission, yet he can walk into engineering when someone is pointing a phased energy weapon at the warp core. That's perfectly safe for him.
And incidentally, that whole thing of Worf standing there silently while people tell him how he feels, I'm taking it that that's all just there so that when we reach the end, we can have, as an audience, a moment where we aren't sure if Worf will snap or not. Only for him to then say that, no, he controls his feelings. But the problem with that is that we assume that to be the case anyway as an audience, because he's one of the lead characters. And it means that earlier on when he's saying he has these conflicting emotions, it's just slightly redundant.
That ad break that you have where Worf is hanging out with the Klingons and the security team arrive and he's looking at one, he's looking at the other, and there couldn't be a less subtle representation of his loyalties being torn than that. And then they cut to the ad break and they chicken out of it by having the little child coming through the doors. if you're going to have the issue, engage with the issue. If you want to have Worf's loyalties torn, then actually do something with that. Actually have him saying or acting as if he's conflicted, because it seems any time that comes up, something happens which means he doesn't have to deal with the situation.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
We've been quite nitpicky on this one, but actually I think it's quite good, you know. Following Coming of Age, which was clearly a step up, you don't feel like they've taken massive steps backwards in this episode.
It feels like they're moving along at a pace with some of the better ones, whereas before we've had ones that have slipped back into the awful. Angel One, I'm looking at you. But this feels much more like we're on a steady groove. There's still room for improvement, but that's not a bad thing.
Well, I'm sure next week's episode is even better than this episode.
Well, that rounds most of that up, but we've got a few spare odds and sods that we'll talk about in our quickfire round.
Quickfire.
They ask, has Worf had any encounters with other Klingons? And he says, hardly none. Hardly none? I'm not sure that's quite grammatically correct. Is he a cowboy suddenly?
Vaughn Armstrong appears for the first time. He goes on to play Admiral Forrest in Enterprise.
And he also plays Gul Dunar and Sesgal on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, as well as various characters on Star Trek Voyager, making him one of the actors that appears in all the modern incarnations of Star Trek.
Mr. Worf? I was just being polite, sir. That's okay. I'm quite happy here on the Enterprise. That's okay. Oh, and Mr. Worf, it wouldn't be the same here without you. You know, like all those other episodes where Worf hasn't had a line or hasn't appeared, and we've all really noticed that he's not been there. Why is the Klingon homeworld called Kling? I mean, Kling sounds unbelievably stupid.
Ah yes, Kling. I was hoping that you might ask this. They decided, after naming it Kling in various episodes during the first season, that sounded stupid. It was retconned in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, to be Kronos, and that was used from that point on. They sort of decided Kling was another Klingon planet, but you know, it never really comes up again. This episode marks the first reference to Talarians, but they wouldn't actually appear until much later. Well, there you go, another episode, and it's one we'll all cling on to. We'll be back covering the Arsenal of Freedom, but for now, goodbye.
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 So during the first season of Star Trek Next Generation, the homeworld was called Kling.
And another name for it was Saran. You know, Kling film, Saran wrap. Do you get that?
Oh, that's a multi-layered pun. Geordi's visor would be used in the film Generations also to spy on various things by Dr. Soren. But maybe we shouldn't spoil that.
Yeah, but that's just a camera. They literally just add a camera to the visor. They don't actually use the visor itself.
This is movie audiences. They can't be trusted to try and interpret Geordi's highly complicated stream of data.
Now, a stream of data. Is that what Tasha Yar was on the receiving end of? Oh dear, I've pleased myself.
It's not as good as my Saran joke. That's much better. Kling film, Saran wrap. I am going to repeat that joke until people laugh at it. Saran, that's the Klingon homeworld. Because Saran wrap and like Kling film. Do you get it?
No.
The only good thing about that is everything is kept fresh on the Klingon homeworld.
Yeah, so I guess we just wrap it up.
In Saran wrap. Or in cling film.
Well, there you go. Another episode. And it's one we'll all cling on to.
Or Saran wrap.